You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking with Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, as his not quite top 10 things for 2024. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, 3 things to talk about today that almost made your top 10 when it comes to agricultural law and taxation. And the first one, involving climate smart, and what is it?
Well, this involves USDA's push for climate-smart ag practices, and that was a big issue in 2024, just off of my top 10 list, which we'll eventually get to in coming weeks, but real close. But as of the end of 2024, USDA had poured at least $3 billion tax dollars into getting farmers to enroll in projects such as those designed to reduce methane emissions and sequester carbon. And that's all under the rubric of USDA's Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities Projects. And it really dovetails in and flows from the Security and Exchange Commission's plans that were announced in 2022, which would force all publicly traded companies to submit an environmental social governance report, those ESG reports. And so what USDA is doing is trying to force farmers into basically ESG-type compliance. Well, 5 months later, after the SEC plans were announced, the USDA's project was announced. And with funding comes a loss of freedom, because what's happening here is that USDA is trying to manipulate certain behavior and reward it with certain types of compensation.
And is the USDA working with Colorado State University on something for this Climate Smart as well?
Well, they're working with numerous universities. Certain universities have received funding for this, and I'm sure this is something we're going to see in the near future once DOJ gets into USDA. Of course, they're dealing with other agencies right now, but USDA will be in the line to face an audit by DOJ. But a number of universities have received funding. Some of the big ag processing firms that receive funding, and even some of the ag media to promote it have received funding.
What's happened so far in 2025 with it?
Well, we're going to see where this goes. I think probably a lot of people that are listening are familiar or have heard in the past couple of years as to what's happened over in the Netherlands and Denmark and Poland and other places in Europe of a revolt basically by farmers with new environmental restrictions that have been placed on their farms. Well, this is kind of the counterpart over here as to what USDA is trying to do. In mid-January of this year, the USDA is kind of related to this. They did put out an interim rule called Technical Guidelines for Climate-Smart Agricultural Crops Used as Biofuel Feedstocks. And that's where we're now seeing the rules for quantifying, reporting, and verifying greenhouse gases. Now, what comes with that and what farmers will know is once it's measured, it'll be regulated. And that's where the rub is with respect to this. So it's going to be interesting to see as we go forward. We've got a new Secretary of Agriculture. We're going to have completely new bureaucracy. We've got a new mindset at the White House and then down through the USDA. Are they going to go forward with this? Are they going to finalize those rules or just let it lay there and die on the vine? Don't know. But we'll have to see what happens with respect to this. It's just kind of a new mindset that we've got coming in right now in USDA. So we'll see where all this climate stuff goes. I would say that the funding for this largely has come out of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, and a lot of that funding is going to get that hasn't been dispersed is going to get pulled.
So something that really affects farmers, but then also agricultural companies?
Well, it could, indeed, because they are the ones that get into these contracts with farmers, and farmers are certifying that they're growing crops in a certain way to get, whether it might be tax credits or whatever the case might be. They're trying to certify that, yes, I produce this grain in a certain manner. It would qualify me for some benefit over here. Our current marketing systems are not set up that way. We don't segregate grain based on the way that it was produced. So it's kind of a really onerous system to manage and regulate. And I wonder whether the new administration is going to carry through with this. Now, some farmers listening have heard about Section 45Z of the Internal Revenue Code. What I'm talking about here does not implement Section 45Z. We're going to have the Treasury write rules for how you qualify for the clean fuel production credit under Section 45Z, how a biofuel plant or an ethanol plant would qualify and then be able to kick some of that back to farmers. This has nothing to do with 45Z. That's totally separate, so people need to keep that in mind. That's another code section that may not really take effect under the new administration. So a lot of things up in the air right now on this.
Something else that almost made your list for agricultural law in 2024, PFAS, and what was all the talk and work around that?
Well, PFAS are a widely used, long-lasting chemical that have components that break down slowly over time, and they've been used since the 1940s, and it's in water, and it's in air, and it's in soil, not just in the United States, but all over the globe, and they're used for commercial and industrial products, and there are studies out there that have shown that exposure to PFAS may be linked to harmful health effects in both humans as well as animals. And really, Shelby, it's an instance where you have over 15,000 chemicals that are associated with various cancers and other health problems that PFAS are a group of. So it's pretty widespread, and it's everywhere in our environment. And we had a couple of significant cases in 2024. This is why it made my almost top 10 list. Is because a couple of major farming operations were completely shut down and bankrupted because the state came in and tested soil and tested samples of livestock products that they had sold their livestock, and then, of course, they are slaughtered and you have the meat that's produced, and they tested those, and they tested positive in the soil and in the meat for the presence of PFAS. So the state came in, these states happened to be testing for this, and was able to shut those operations down, saying you can't grow crops, you can't sell livestock for meat products from your farm. Well, then there goes your income stream. And you've got to remediate your soil at an extreme cost. And the way the farmers got into this problem is because a lot of farmers, in an attempt to save on fertilizer costs, will use biosolids. And so they'll go buy biosolids from a plant that has biosolids produced from a byproduct of their process, and they'll apply it to their land. Well, the lawsuits were back against the suppliers of the biosolids. So the legal system is trying to sort out who's responsible for what here, and these are multi-million-dollar cases. So we'll see where this goes going forward, and some states have taken preemptive action on this. Maine has banned land application of biosolids and set up a fund for impacted farmers, and other states are looking into providing compensation for disaffected farmers. Now, as of right now, Kansas does not test for the presence of PFAS. If they were to start doing that at some point in the future, then we're going to have some farming operations that need to be concerned about that. So we'll see where this goes. That's a big issue. I think it'll probably still be on the table when we talk about this in a year from now.
And something else operations need to keep an eye on this year, EID mandate for the cattle industry.
Yeah, mandatory EID, it took effect November 5. It's being challenged in the courts. In federal district court in South Dakota, the lawsuit against mandatory animal ID has been filed. Currently, the court has kicked that thing back, basically saying that the plaintiffs, the challengers, didn't have standing to sue because they couldn't show damages. So they are amending their complaint as we speak right now, as we record this, to include ranchers that had to expend funds to buy the mandatory type identification tags. And so that case, they'll refile that. That case will go forward, I would anticipate.
What livestock are required to have these EIDs?
This is cattle and bison. And the reason that this is so contentious in the livestock industry is this goes back 30 years when we got into the WTO. And as part of the WTO, there was a push to trace livestock disease. And so there were initial systems. The EIS program was established in the United States. That went by the wayside. That was replaced by a different system starting in 2010. And then in 2013, in regulations, USDA promised cattlemen that they could have flexibility in how they complied. Well, what happened in the most recent rules is that flexibility was completely removed, and they went to mandatory ID. You don't have any flexibility on how you can comply with the rules, and that's what has upset a lot of cattlemen in this, particularly because of the cost associated with it. They've taken the lower cost options off the table for cattlemen, and that's why you have the lawsuit. And this affects relatively smaller operations more so than it does larger operations. So we'll see what happens with this. There are some other issues I could see from a legal standpoint with the regulations themselves. This governs cattle that travel in interstate commerce. Well, you don't have to have the mandatory ID if your cattle don't cross state lines. And so that makes a difference for us in Kansas because we have packing plants. And so we have some producers that necessarily wouldn't have to comply because their cattle never cross state lines. So if they're born, bred, raised in Kansas and go to a packing plant in Kansas, it's not a problem. But let's say I'm in Ohio, there are no packing plants in Ohio. So those will cross state lines. So the impact of the cost of this is what I'm getting at here. It's disproportionate. And that's going to be one of the legal issues that the courts will have to settle out on this. Again, going forward, it's interesting to see what's going to happen with administrative agencies, including USDA, and this may be one of these that doesn't get fully implemented. I don't know. It's already in effect. We'll have to see what the auditors of the administrative agencies come up with.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. If you'd like to read more on these topics, I will link his blog article, The Not Quite Top 10, in today's show notes on agtoday.net.